what is for you one of the most exciting things or news items you've seen in the past few weeks?
For me, the last few weeks, maybe the last few months, has really been about. I think very clearly there's something happening with fintechs and maybe enterprises more broadly, and crypto adoption, and specifically Ethereum adoption. And so I think if we're looking for a very tangible moment here, Robinhood stock tokens and Robinhood chain would probably be like a recent moment that speaks to this trend. But those products don't come together overnight. They've definitely been in process for some time. And I think if we look back over 2025 and ask what's different, what's allowing these enterprises to come on chain right now, the most obvious thing to me is we can point to the change in administration in the U.S. I think very clearly that is giving better guidance, clear rules of the road for enterprises and fintechs to come on chain. And if we're looking for something very specific, we can look to the Genius Act passing last week. So we have this convergence where rules of engagement are changing, and that's leading to enterprise. And I think fintechs is a vanguard amongst them, taking advantage of those clear rules and moving their products on chain.
I know I've been to ETC where Robbie, you did the big sort of Apple presentation where they launched the tokenized stocks. How are you receiving that news? Was it like completely coming out of the blue, or did you knew already that it was going to come?
I think, like I was saying, a lot of these things take a good amount of time and investment. I think Robinhood has been thinking about this strategy. I expect Robinhood has been thinking about this strategy for many, many months, probably going back into 2024, even beyond that. Um, and so definitely not surprised to see the announcement, and if anything, encouraged. Robinhood has been a harbinger of changes in finance, since it was founded. It has really forced so many changes on the brokerage and broader financial industry. So for us, operating infrastructure on top of Ethereum, but in crypto more broadly, we think this is just the start of a trend of many, many more fintech specifically, but then enterprises more broadly, payments companies, financial institutions, et cetera, very likely moving on chain. And so we view it as incredibly exciting.
I think it is very exciting. And I've also checked your entire journey in crypto, which has been very interesting as you've been going through multiple entities. And prior to this, you've been the head of product at Coinbase Custody. And I wanted to ask you, like, Coinbase and the takeover of Deribit and recently the IPOs, they are taking over the markets in such a way that there is a lot of focus on crypto enterprises that are being listed on regular exchanges or as regular stocks. How do you see that happening, and the amount of treasury companies are coming in? Now we see recently Tom Lee building an Ethereum treasury company. Um, what is your thesis on that part?
I joined Coinbase in the very beginning of 2018, and I was very lucky. I got to help build out Coinbase Custody and then Coinbase Prime, and really got to be a part of bringing the first wave of institutions into sort of the crypto ecosystem and really helping them get exposure to crypto assets very early on. A reflection over that time is that there just haven't been great opportunities for public market investors to get access to crypto more generally. Just thinking about spot Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs, they are 18 and 12 months old, respectively. They have not been around that long. There hasn't been a lot of ways for just the generic public market investor to get access to crypto. And what I think we're seeing right now is there's been this trend is probably in response to a lot of pent up demand from that public market investor to find ways to invest in crypto. And Coinbase, I think, is probably seen as a broad index on exposure to the crypto space. But a lot of these treasury companies, follow on and offer leveraged exposure to whatever specific asset they're operating as a treasury for. And clearly there's demand for that. So I expect we'll very likely continue to see this trend accelerate in the next couple of months.
I think it's funny. I mean, Sater has provided a standard for Bitcoin treasury companies, and there are so many copycats. However, it's very risky to invest in such a treasury company when you don't clearly understand the depth or how they are issuing it. But it's good to see the hype being back into the markets. And one of the things, you have been having such a pretty long journey in crypto. What I wanted to ask is, what brought you into the blockchain ecosystem, and why did you make the switch from an enterprise like Coinbase going into Optimism or OP Labs?
I got to grow up studying computers. I studied computer science. I was a software engineer for many years, both just for fun as a hobbyist in high school and then in college. And then professionally, I wrote code for a couple of years, working for a trading firm in Chicago. Um, and blockchain to me was really this awesome convergence of computer science and just computers broadly and like a lot of those trends, cryptography, et cetera, and finance. And so it was just really a way to combine these two fields that I felt like I had some depth in, but was still very nascent at the time when I joined back in 2017, 2018. So that was what was exciting for me. Um, Today, in some sense, I've kind of gotten to come full circle at Optimism. I worked at an equities clearing custodian back from 2012 to 2017, and we were actually the custody platform that Robinhood first launched on. And so I got to help support their business literally starting in 2012 before they were even launched. And now, we're building blockchain infrastructure that Robinhood and many other fintechs are coming on board to today. And so for me, Coinbase was awesome. Such an incredible place to learn, such an incredible place to have leverage to bring brands like Robinhood and other big institutions on chain. Now we kind of get to like get into the guts of the protocol at Optimism and really figure out how to fine tune that infrastructure for what those folks need, and again accelerate their adoption on chain.
Well, we're going to talk about that for quite a while, and I think it's even more complex to run a tech company in the sense of OP Labs building tech for developers and users than having Coinbase. But I'm sure that we're going to talk about it later. First, all of a sudden we see Ethereum waking up in such a focal, vital way where there is so much inflow in the Ethereum ETF. What's happening? Why is this taking place? We touched upon the bills for quite a little bit, but why is that relevant, and why is it right now during the summer? That's usually a really calm period that Ethereum decides, hey, we're here.
I have a very unsatisfying answer here. My belief, having been in the crypto space for a while now, is that narrative follows price. And if we just look at Ethereum's price action recently, I think it's up 55% in the last month. It's up something like 130, 140% in the last 3 months. That is price action that's going to get anybody excited and get a lot of people talking about what's going on. My perspective is that the things that are in place that are contributing to this trend are structural. They have been in place for some time. The Ethereum ETFs are spot ETFs, are a year old. And it just takes a lot of time for new financial products to find their way into the hands of institutional investors, retail investors, getting activated on various platforms, et cetera. And so I think it was natural to expect that it would take some amount of time before sort of the floodgates were opened and there was truly like wide open access to these instruments. Um, I don't think there is something necessarily that has happened in the last 3 months that is changing Ethereum's position or really contributing to these flows. I think this has been a wave that's been in progress for some time. But if we are looking for a recent news event, I think we do have to look at the passing of the Genius Act last week. Um, Ethereum dominates stablecoin market share. I think something like 55 to 60% of all stablecoins are on Ethereum L1. And so if you think that the Genius Bill is going to contribute to an acceleration in stablecoins, massive growth in stablecoin market cap, it feels very obvious to look at Ethereum and say a lot of this growth is going to accrue here just because it already has dominant position. And so that's obviously going to lead to more TVL, more activity, just growth on Ethereum broadly, and so that could certainly be contributing to price here in the short term.
It's interesting. You mentioned that narrative follows price, and I think we run a venture capital. Now price goes up, and all of a sudden the amount of investments are going parabolic within like all these startups. As all of a sudden it makes sense again. But yeah, the Genius Bill has been approved. Also, the Clarity Act is passed in the House. How relevant is that compared to the Genius Bill?
I think incredibly relevant, in some ways, probably more relevant, or maybe more exciting to large enterprises like Coinbase, and I think folks that might follow them on chain. I can give an example here. In 2021, Coinbase went public. And part of that process is Coinbase opened up its entire business to the SEC, and the SEC took a long, arduous look at Coinbase's business model, all of its activities, and said, "You're good to go public." 2 years later, in 2023, the SEC sued Coinbase for operating an unregistered securities exchange. And while I wasn't at Coinbase when this happened, I can imagine the perspective inside was a bit of like, WTF, you guys took this long, arduous look at our business model. You said we're good to go. And now you're saying this same business model is illegal. Like, how is this possible? How are you able to, on the one hand, give us the thumbs up and then 2 years later sue us? And the reason for that is there was no clear guidelines for how this should work. It was all open into interpretation. And so the SEC in 2021 interpreted Coinbase's business model a certain way, said you're good to go. In 2023, they interpret it differently. And so I think if you are a really, really large enterprise, let's pick on JP Morgan for a second, and you're saying crypto is still nascent but growing, it's going to be a very small part of my business. Why should I come into this space when I know I'm sort of like subject to the capriciousness of the SEC, where they might say I can come in today and operate and then 2 years later sue me? That's just not worth it for a really, really large business to get into. And so what clarity in particular for market participants gives is those very clear rules of the road. That example cannot happen anymore, assuming you're following, the bills, the laws as they are prescribed. And so I think it is that specific shift that now lets many, many large enterprises that are going to be, the second wave of adopters anyway of a new technology get comfortable coming on chain.